Alright, so, just like that lesson where we covered all of that stuff on that pretty picture I just handed out, I think this is probably one of the most important topics that we're going to talk about. Lesson plan. Now, having said that, why should we have lesson plans? Why should we have lesson plans?
So that we can reflect how we did in that lesson.
So we can reflect how we did in the lesson, okay?
It also serves as a chart for what, that make sure that you cover precisely what it is you want to cover to achieve your
Precisely what
class
want to
objective.
cover, okay?
It also installs confidence in your students if they see that you're prepared.
Okay, all right, all good. But also too, who here has made every single class that you've been scheduled for? All right? In a lot of cases, if you have to, you know, if you get hit by that bus and you do survive, or you have something come up, in case you're unable to sit your class, all right, what's that instructor that's sitting in for you going to go by?
What you have planned for that?
Huh?
What you have planned for that day?
Yeah, what you have planned for that day, and if there's nothing that he can go to as a guide, then he's pretty much winging it. Now, is it fair for your students if that instructor is just winging it? No. All right, so.
But there is the syllabus. The syllabus breaks down everything week by week. So
Well, again, it breaks down what's supposed to be covered, but does it include those learning activities that relate back to those learning objectives? All right? So, again, so it's, a lesson plan is supposed to tie together all of the stuff that we've been talking about previously. Also do things like address, you know, those activities. If you have a topic, that lesson plan should dictate, well, for this people who learn as like this, what do you do to make sure that those people, those visual people, get the stuff? What do you do in that lesson to make sure those kinesthetic learners pick up the material? So the lesson plan should cover all of that, all right? And to tie that together, we'll take a look at that template for a course outline I passed off afterwards. All right? But, as usual, there's a slide. All right. It's not important what it looks like. The important is that it makes sure that it performs its most important function. And what is that most important function? That it emphasizes what the students will be doing rather than what you will be doing. Because if you create your lesson plan on what you will be doing, all right, like that last sign says, all right, it's going to be geared towards what you like to do in class versus what the students need to do to pick up those objectives. All right? So the lesson plan shouldn't be written for you, all right? It should be written more towards what the student is going to need to get out of that lesson and what the student is going to do to get the most out of that lesson. Does that make sense? All right. So, lesson planning. In the article, we talked about there's 3 activities that the lesson plan should cover. First of which is, what is the student going to learn? All right. The second thing it should outline is what activities are going to be used, all right, to help you assess that learning. And then, number 3, assessment. What are you going to do, all right, at the end of the lecture to ensure that students have grasped everything that you put out? Now also, as an answer to a question I received earlier, will we always have time to do everything that we've set out to in our lesson plan? All right? No. So that lesson plan has to be flexible. All right? So that lesson plan should be written to assist you in your classroom or your lesson time management. All right? You should have, and how does the article say you do that?
By mapping out what you need to cover versus what you would like to cover.
All right, mapping out what you need to cover versus what you'd like to cover. Also, all right, you're going to have lesson objectives. All right, what does the article talk about we should do with those lessoning objectives?
They're the ones that we must cover.
Prioritize them.
Yeah.
All right, prioritize them. Things that you must cover, all right, put those things up at the top. So in case you run out of time, all right, you've covered the most important topics. All right. So let's kind of walk through what we're talking about here in this article. All right. So, and it says you should have to go through these 6 steps. All right, when you create your lesson plan. And what is always going to be the first step in anything? And whether you're talking about the course or the lesson itself, is to establish.
What's the objective?
What are the objectives, all right? Outline those objectives. What do you need to cover in the course, all right? What do you want the students to learn? What are the most important topics for the students to understand? And what you want them to take away from that particular lesson, all right? And again, prioritizing those things is going to help you, all right, make sure that you cover the most important items, all right? They talk about creating an introduction, all right? What are they talking about there when they say develop the introduction?
Be creative,
What do you mean be creative?
get them interested in what you're talking about.
Get them interested, but also, what else?
Gauge the level of their previous understanding.
Gauge the level of previous understanding, all right? All right, so for instance, whenever I teach a course anyplace else, I go through, and then in the introductions, I have the students tell me what their previous experience has been in that topic, what field are they working with. That way I know during the lessons how deep I need to go, or whether I can just broad stroke several topics. All right. Okay. Now here is kind of easier, especially in technical courses. If everything is scaffolded, you kind of have an idea of what the students should know. But it's still, does that mean that you just assume that they've grasped everything prior? No, you should still have some sort of assessment. When I teach forensics, I give an exam at the beginning of the class, all right? Stuff that they should know, and in that way, you know, the students, oh my God, I didn't know that. All right? And so it kind of brings back in their mind the stuff that they should have already accomplished. All right, so you want to go in and do that. Plan the specific activities, all right? For each one of those, again, you should have those course learning objectives, and then also weekly, you should have the learning objectives for that particular lesson, all right? And you want to make sure that you plan some activities that are going to assess whether those students have picked up those learning objectives. And again, those activities should be, I mean, they should hit those 3, at least 2 of those 3 learning styles, be it visual activities, auditory activities, or kinesthetic activities. And here, we should always make sure, especially in the technical curriculum, that we use those kinesthetic activities. All right? Or you'll get to think, oh, there's not enough hands-on in this course. All right? So you always want to make sure that you hit those items. All right. Check for understanding. All right? At the end of the class. All right? What kind of, Dominic, I'll get you with food in your mouth. What kind of things do you do at the end of the class to make sure that your students have picked up what you wanted them to get?
Well, you can just ask random questions, but it's if you have time, it's a little bit better to have a written, like basic written assignment based on that lesson.
Okay.
And ask them to address something. Well, G is a little bit different, but have them tell you some things that they learned from the class.
Okay.
It would vary. Sometimes a group discussion, sometimes individual report.
Okay.
I don't put them on the spot. It's either a group or I ask for volunteers to share.
Okay.
Because I don't want to corner people in
Okay.
class.
What about you, Leticia?
When we do in-class exercises, and I usually ask them, okay, what is it that we need to do? What is the first thing that we need to do? And I'll just step right through it rather than just give them questions.
Okay, Tom?
I do it, not necessarily at the end of class, but interspersed throughout the class, do checkpoints to see if they've understood the material.
And that's always, students, for some reason here, students are not apt to, if you ask, are there any questions, to ask questions. All right, and I don't know what it is, all right, but they're not apt to. So there's got the, I mean, doing things like anonymous, pieces of paper handed out, what did you get out of this lesson? It's probably more suitable to our environment for some reason.
I always ask them for like, what's the 10,000-foot view of this, of the concept?
I find asking to the group, it gets discussion going between a couple different students when you do it, where you're not pointing out somebody to explain it. Somebody will say something and somebody else will chime in.
All right. Number 5 would be to develop a conclusion and a preview, all right? Go over what you've done in class, after you've gauged the student's understanding, then go over, basically summarize what you've been covered, and then also introduce what's going to be covered the following week, all right? And that's said to kind of tie everything together. Forgot to mention back when we talked about introduction, all right? One of the things that the article talks about, and is one thing I typically do, I write an agenda up on the board, all right? That way the students know exactly what's going to be covered that evening, all right? It gets their minds prepared to, all right? I always write chow in there to make sure that they know I'm going to give them a chance to eat, or what have you. All right. But also you should have, so that way they know what's going to be covered in class that evening, and then they can be mentally prepared for it. All right. Final step, create a realistic timeline. Now, can you do that if you've never taught the lesson before? Probably not, but you can kind of gauge it. All right. Typically, all right, so for instance, what we typically do maybe in software development is if we have a project or an assignment, we say, well, how long will it take us to do it? And then multiply that by 2 or 3. All right. And it should kind of be the same thing. How long do you think this topic would take for you to understand, and then multiply that by some factor. Because again, you don't want to build so much into a lesson that you never get at it, most of it. All right? And then that's why it's also important to prioritize those things, to make sure that you cover the most important things first. And is a lesson plan set in stone? Once you create it, does that mean you never change it? No. All right? You're going to modify that eventually until it becomes, all right, as good as possible can get it. Presenting the lesson, once you have that lesson plan all met, then pretty much you want to make sure that you follow it. Now, it may even be a good idea, all right, to give a copy of that lesson plan to the students. All right, there's nothing wrong with that. All right, that way it shows them what you are going to be covering, the activities that they're going to be doing. All right,
It'd be a good thing to put in web class.
and also it may be a good thing to put in web class. So there's nothing wrong with that. As long as this, the more you can let the students know what they're going to be covering in class, the better, right? That way it doesn't appear as if you're winging it. They appreciate that you've planned it, and they appreciate that you've let them know what you have planned for the lesson. All right. After it's all done, all right, this is the big part, all right, reflecting on it. Does it work? Where do I need to improve it? Have the students, when I see this, all right, have the students gained the understanding, all right, by the feedback that they've given me in that individual lesson. All right. If not, then that means I may need to move some of those lower objectives up, or move them around, or what have you, or spend more time on specific objectives. Because again, you're going to have that mixed bag of students. Those students who pick it up like that, and those students who are going to need a little bit of extra time. Right. So a lesson plan is always a work in progress. All right. And as the article concludes, a good lesson plan is not necessarily one that works forever. All right. It's always going to need some changes to it. Yeah, they're building a new roof on top of it.
Those are shots fired.
All right. So any questions on that discussion? All right, now the next article, I did have you take a look at the feedback article, right? I'm not going to cover that in detail, all right, but again, we all know. So I asked the question yesterday, did that week 6 survey ever happen? And I guess it didn't. The one that Travis was working on?
I haven't seen it.
Yeah, so I guess that didn't happen, all right? But we know that, yes, we're supposed to be instituting some sort of feedback, because without feedback from the students, really we don't know how we're doing, all right? And the article talks about, yes, there's several ways to get that feedback. One is to do that mid-course. They say it's 6 weeks, or midterm survey, all right? And you want to do that because at the end of the course, it's too late, all right? If the students give you feedback in the middle of the course, then you know how you're doing and what things you may need to change during that course. At the end of the course, it's too late. It's good for the next class, but it's not good for this class. Now, another thing it talks about is, should you just read that feedback on your own from the students? All right. No, it talks about the fact that maybe you should have a coworker sit with you and take a look at that feedback, all right? Because you may turn a blind ear, you may turn a blind eye, or what have you. All right, so you might want to have someone sit down with you and discuss that. Also, it talks about if, and this is the case if there's no formal, all right, what do you want to call it?
Process.
Formal process, maybe hook up with a buddy. And you two, all right, co-evaluate each other. All right? Another thing, and I took this to heart, is have someone video you. All right. I noticed the first time in the first seminar that we had here, I was doing this a lot. All right. So you'll see things that you won't know that you're doing unless you watch yourself and listen to yourself teach. All right. You may have a habit of saying a certain thing over and over again. You don't notice, but the students are sitting there with a piece of paper counting it. All right. So that is a good idea to record yourself doing what you're doing. All right. It lets you see how others see you, how others perceive you. All right. That's not an easy one to do, but I'm sure everybody has cell phones. All right. Stick it in the back of the class, and no need to run. You don't need to run it for an entire session. Just run it for 10 or 15 minutes. All right. To see how you're doing. All right. Did everybody get a chance to look at the course outline template I passed out?
Briefly.
All right. And like I talked about last week, I'm developing this entire package that addresses course development and a syllabus. So this is just one of the things. And really, you would fill this out when you're creating a course, but there's no problem in doing it right now for a course that you already have developed. All right. And from this, you can easily pull out those lesson plans, all right? Because she's going to tell you what the learning objectives is for that particular session, what activities you're going to do in that session, and what homework is going to be assigned in that session. Okay? Yes?
There's a comment. So, in teaching quantitative courses like algebra, so much depends on how many people show up.
Mhm.
Because the way I do it is that if I've got 5 students, I try to map out the class such that I lecture, I do problems, then I have them go up the board
Right.
and work problems. If I've got 5 students, and in the course of a 4-hour period, they do 8 each, for example,
Mhm.
that's 40 problems that can be done in a class when each student goes up and demonstrates. But if I only got 2 students show up, then it's, I alter the number of problem exercises that we do. So that outline, there's a certain amount of flexibility that
Right.
needs to go in there,
Right.
depending on the number of students that show up.
Okay. So you're saying basically modify it,
So instead of saying, okay, for this particular class, you're gonna work on problems 20, 23, 25, and 30.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than do that, I just say, okay, do selected problems from section 3.1 to 3.
Oh, no, yeah, that's perfectly fine, that's perfectly fine, that's perfectly fine. Yes, exactly, something like, a math class, you can say, okay, you will only do 10 problems, all right? Because, yes, you do have to have some flexibility. But as long as there's some activity that's there that you know meets those objectives, and also if somebody comes and sits in on that class, they can say, okay, he wants me to pick selected exercises from this section to make sure that they have that. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. And again, like I said, learning the lesson plan, nor is the course outline. The activities in there set in stone. They have to be made flexible.
The second comment I have is, I really like the lesson plan for, in the event that something happens to you and
Mhm.
substitute. But in addition to that, I would love to have the substitute give me an end of course report.
You mean end of session report?
End of sessions report. What did you guys cover? How many students showed up? Who
Mhm.
were they that showed up? What were you able to cover?
Okay.
And things like that, because all too often, if I was gone for a class, I'd wonder what did the
Right.
students cover?
Right.
So, but it's not formalized in
No.
any of the institutions that.
No, it's not. Yeah, the only way I've found to do that is you come in the next session and you say, you kind of
Yes.
briefly go over, you ask the students, but basically you briefly go over, you pick out the major topics. Okay, you should have discussed this last week, all right? And are there any questions, or is there anything else that you need me to expound upon?
At the very least, I would like, I give points for participation. If a student shows up, he gets points. If he doesn't, he loses
Right,
points.
right.
And a couple of times when I was absent, not so much here, but I'd come in and I have no idea who showed up.
Who was there
previous
because
year,
it was,
previous
right,
week
because
or
of
not.
participation points. Right.
So I think that my 2 cents were to formalize an end of class report in the event that you serve as a substitute.
Okay. And that could be something that we have in the web class shell, that's right up there on top of the syllabus. Something that any substitute instructor fills out, right, that you would have there, right there, when you came back to class, that he could click on and like take a look at.
I normally just had them email me and tell who was there and things like that.
Email is fine.
Yeah,
So that-
but that's good to say who was there, but it doesn't see if that substitute actually covered the material that you expected them to cover. Right? And in some cases, you won't be able to have a substitute that knows the material, or there just won't be any. But if there's a lesson plan posted on web class with activities that the students are supposed to get from that lesson, then, you have an email go out to all of the students, all right, unfortunately, there's no substitute instructor, however, these are the things that I would like you to do for today's lesson, and then we'll discuss those at the next session.
It would be a good idea to have a reminder, because occasionally, and not recently, but in the past, I've had subs who, they went in and did whatever I asked them to do, but I never heard back from them. I had to track them down, because I
Right.
didn't even know if they
Right.
showed up.
Right.
Because it wasn't a routine for them to ever say, yeah, I did that, or I didn't do it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I think I'll create something, and we'll just have it as part of the standard web class shell.
Plus, it's kind of good because it tells them what they should report on too.
Right.
Yeah.
Because some will tell you different pieces of information, but they may not tell you everything you wanted to know.
Okay. Yeah, and depend on the week, like we would, for the census though, we'd have to have attendance information, but not everybody knows to do that.
Okay. All good. All right, so I will have, as promised, I will have the entire packet. I've modified the syllabus, all right? I have this course outline, I have a course development worksheet, and there's another sheet that I have, another template I have. But I'll pass all of those around for comment, and then they will all be posted to, and I'm trying to find a good place to post them to. Everybody doesn't have access to OpenKM, all right? So I think they'll have to go in our Google Docs area, which everybody has access to. Or maybe even just employee web class, all right? But I'll make sure that they're all available for whenever there's course modifications, et cetera. Questions?
Well, no, not a question, but I have a very quick Zen story to tell you about surveys.
Okay?
I had a friend who was a trainer at the county that's all she did. And she confided in me one time, she got evaluations from all the students in all the classes. She used to take the bad evaluations and throw them away before she turned them into her boss. So I thought about it, and what I said is, you should throw the good ones away and keep the bad ones. They have more value. And she thought it was ridiculous. Then I talked to her, met her about 3 years later, and she said, you were right. So I guess she had thought about it. She started looking at negative comments as having value. And,
As long as they're reasonable, they're not like, oh, you stink.
Oh, yeah.
Well, yeah. Those you can go on and just ditch them, but yeah. If the student is taking the time to write comments other than, you suck, then you should probably read it.
Well, I always thought it was interesting that the students that gave me the most negatives were the ones that weren't attending regularly. And I always thought if they weren't attending at a regular rate, they shouldn't be able to evaluate me because it wasn't fair when they say, well, he doesn't cover things in the right order, I don't understand. Well, yeah, you missed 3 classes, how are you supposed? And those were the ones that were giving me the most negatives. And I think there should be a cutoff on, if you're not attending 60% of the class, then you shouldn't be able to evaluate me.
Yeah, I had the same experience with students who wouldn't show up. And when they did show up, they'd insist on having a recap just for them.
Yeah.
Maybe they're an hour late, and their complaint was that I wouldn't give them any information. Well, it's like, yeah, because you showed up here at 7:15, and you wanted me to go over the entire lesson. Like, nope.
Yeah.
And they don't like that.
To the deficit of every other.
Yeah, how completely unreasonable, you know. But it is sort of that mindset, and I think you can identify those people pretty easily.
Yeah.
Yeah, when we had Papa Bear and we were getting the surveys, you know, I would get them all first, and then if the comments were just, the instructor sucks, I wouldn't even bother passing that on to the instructor, but if there were other things in there, then I would pass them on to the instructor.
Something I used to say to my students when I taught at San Diego State was, Gene sucks is not constructive, Gene sucks because is constructive.
Yes.
I might have used slightly different language. But
So, yeah. All right, folks.
Thank you, sir.